Hi guys, welcome to True Crime Rocket Science from another really icy South Africa. It's really cold. We're gonna do a review of day one of the Nicola Bulley inquest. Obviously, there's day two to come, and in day two we're gonna have family members. Paul Ansell's going to testify. I think her sister's going to testify. I'm not quite sure. But there's been already quite a lot of interesting information today. Two witnesses saying that they heard screaming. That's actually the headline of this Guardian article. Short scream heard on morning, Nicola Bulley disappeared. I think it's important to stress that that scream was heard like at around about 9:30, around about the time that she disappeared as well. It's not like it was heard. I mean, if it was mid-morning or late in the morning, that really wouldn't have been relevant. So at the time that she disappeared, a scream was heard. Is there any anything to this idea that it was a short scream? And then also, hello Tammy. Then also, I don't know if you know, the autopsy showed a cut across the bridge of her nose. We're going to talk about that. And then two things that I read, but I can't seem to find now. As far as I know, when they recovered her body, and I'm sorry if this is a bit sensitive to say, but they found that there was mud on her face. And so one wonders, did that happen at the time that she died, or did that happen based on where her remains ended up? I don't know. And then something else I saw, but I haven't been able to find since then. Apparently, her phone volume, the phone shows that some of the last activity on the phone was the phone volume being adjusted. Do any of you guys remember seeing that? I saw it somewhere and I haven't been able to find it since. Maybe we will. So good to see some of you guys here. Terry Dean, Jenny Friedman, SM Kowalinsky, Pauline, Sharon, Simples Meerkat, haven't seen you in a while. Ray, first live here, welcome. Snowline, good to see you as well. So yeah, welcome to all the British viewers, and then obviously the Americans as well. And then there's Bria in France tuning in. Good to have you all here. Iceland from Oregon in the far west, northwestern USA. I'm sure it's a lot warmer where you are. So before we get started, I want to take you guys through kind of a review just of some of the photos, some of the pictures, some of what we knew regarding this case, and then we're going to obviously go into the inquest itself. So this tall fellow over here is Paul Ansell, Nicola's partner. Right, and they're looking into the River Wire, and you can see over here just how steep that embankment is. So if you just imagine someone in the water right here, do you think that they could get out? So in other words, if you did fall in accidentally, would you be able to get out? And so that is closer to the scene, and there again you see just how steep it is on both sides. On both sides, it's pretty steep. And I think one of the reasons the river is as steep as it is, one reason is because of flood planning. So they purposefully sort of bulldoze levees, and they construct the walls around the river to be higher and steeper, right? And the other reason is floodwaters. The floodwaters scour the river anyway, right? So there's Paul Ansell. That's the course of the river. And so some of the things we asked was, is it normal that it takes 23 days to find somebody? And so part of what has come out in this inquest is not fluid dynamics, but the flow rate of the river. We wanted to know from Paul what was going on with his relationship with her, what was going on with her, and we're going to be finding that out tomorrow. We also want to know what was going on with Willow. Was there a ball there? Was there a ball? Did Nicola possibly chase after a ball, and that's how she ended up in the river? Is that relevant? And that did actually come up in the inquest. Just a reminder of the sort of area. So what also came up in the inquest was something that came up in the media. They reviewed all the CCTV. They didn't find anything suspicious in it. And anyway, so there's the bench. The bench is over there, and it's right where the river twists over there. And so the direction the river's flowing in is this direction. And can you see over there, this section here looks really shallow. And so I don't know, a question I would have is, if she did fall in by accident and the river was flowing 2 meters a second or quite fast, was she already deceased by the time she got here, where it's really quite shallow? It's wide and it's shallow. It's also quite shallow over there, right? Was she already deceased just in this little section? And some people might say yes, that she could have been deceased within half a minute, and I think that is about half a minute. Wolfie, good to see you. Chelsea, good to see you. So let me ask you guys, are there any of you who are just basically completely ignoring the inquest, basically saying this is a waste of time? I know where it's going and I don't believe any of it. Is there anyone here who thinks that or believes that? Zircon says, did she have head contusions? Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know. She had a cut across the bridge of her nose, and the pathologist believed that was post-mortem. Pauline says no, this is relevant. Kaz Smythe says yes. And the reason I asked that question is, if you're saying I'm going to ignore the inquest, and the information in the inquest is bullshit, or it's a conspiracy, or whatever, that's a little bit like Stockton Rush ignoring people talking to him about safety and ignoring whatever you want to call it, criticism, a difference of opinion. You do that at your peril, right? Where information is being provided and you say, I don't actually want to hear that information. Isn't that what happened in the Titan incident? I just think it's worth considering. James Houghton says, I'm interested in the findings, though don't expect it to change my view. Okay. It is a good analogy, right? Okay, and so let's have a look at some more pictures. Whenever you see that sort of thing in the water, that means the river's flowing quite quickly, and this is a picture that Nicola herself took. Yeah, the level of the river is quite high, right? It's quite high and it's flowing quite strongly. And so one of the questions that I've been asking about this case, about the Kylie Rodney case, and then also about Mallory Beach, is how good are we at finding people in water? Also in the submersible case, took 5 days for them to really find the vehicle. I don't think they've found any human remains with the original capsule. But how good are we at investigating incidents that occur in water? Are we as clever and as quick and as astute about what happens in water as we are on land? What does this case show us? Do we overestimate our abilities? And if so, could that have also been what Nicola did? She was perhaps running after a ball, or she overestimated something and tripped and fell into the water by accident. But it happens all the time. We don't realize how easy it is to make a mistake. What happened to Kylie Rodney as well, took a wrong turn. And so we still need to find out, what was her true mental state. And from what we've heard today, she seemed to be normal. I don't know whether passing someone, like you walking your dog and someone walks by you, I don't know whether you're in the right place to be able to say what that person's psychology is. But she seemed to be acting normal. Affect is quite an important thing to look at, right? Yeah, I mean, that is why Adventures with Purpose became such a big thing, was because they found so many people in water, and they were such in-demand specialists. Magical Mother says, I think she was so familiar with the area she got complacent. Isn't that true with all of us? We get in a car, for example, and we're so used to it, we get complacent. I know when I drove through America, I started off very, very vigilant. Now, once I got lazy towards the end, but there were moments towards the end where I sort of had to remind yourself, you're not in South Africa, you've got to drive on the other side of the road. You kind of had to remind yourself to stay alert, right? She was a very attractive lady. And I think that is one, like, people say, why does one case get so much attention compared to another? Like, why did Nicola get so much attention and not a 55-year-old guy who disappeared a month before she did and was found a month later? It's because you sort of think she seemed to be living a fairy tale. She seemed to be beautiful, happy, a nice person, and what could have happened to her other than something like murder, right? How could this beautiful, sensible-looking woman have made a stupid mistake or slipped or whatever? It just doesn't seem likely. And when it's someone who's, I guess, a lot older, not that 55 is that old, but it doesn't feel quite as tragic somehow. She was walking her dog. It seemed like a very pleasant morning, and then disaster, right? And so we were asking what was their relationship like, and he has said that she was struggling, and the question is, we still need to find out: was she struggling a little bit, or was she struggling a lot? Was she overcoming her struggle? Was her struggle getting her down, or was she sort of managing? Was she sort of coping? And then, of course, if only dogs could talk, we would love to know what Willow saw. Willow's effectively a witness. We would also love to know whether she took a ball along. If she took a ball along, it gives you a sense that she would have been more, what's the word? She would have been more mobile, active, moving, animated than if there wasn't a ball. That would mean she would be crouching down. She would be, and you would imagine if she was on I mean, I've got a dog here. Here he is. I sometimes take a ball as well, and it's not some kind of pattern. Sometimes I take a ball, sometimes I don't. But you can imagine if she was on a Zoom call, that she would probably know and want to keep her dog preoccupied. And the best way to do that would be with a ball, right? And we know that this dog was obsessed with his ball. And so I think the ball aspect is a really important part of this. Yeah, I'm sure he does. Bob Dog says, I believe she had an altercation. Okay. Okay. So there's another picture of the dog and the harness. And that's the other thing that for me has always been quite a mystery about this case is why was the harness lying halfway between the bench and the river, right? In a scenario where she perhaps took her own life, would she really want to say, I'm in the river, right? And I think Virginia Woolf left her walking stick by the river, so maybe the answer is yes. But isn't her phone going to be saying that anyway? On the other hand, if she had the harness on her lap, did it fall off because the dog brought her the ball and the ball started rolling down the embankment? And then it obviously fell off her lap. Is that kind of what happened? And one's also got to feel for her children. You know, it's been 6 months. They've been without their mother now for 6 months. We try to figure out her patterns and if someone was intercepting them by going into her Strava. And that didn't really, I thought that was going to show us a lot. It didn't really show us as much as I thought it might. She didn't seem that, although she looks quite in shape, she didn't seem that committed to her Strava. There's some family members. Another possibility is did the dog chase after an animal, a duck, something like that, and Nicola got up to protect the other animal or get the animal out of the dog's mouth or something like that. So again, if only animals could talk. And I do think in a scenario where you say she took her own life, it's very hard to imagine someone who loves dogs and walks her dog quite often, that you just abandon the dog, that you just leave the dog to its own devices. Suppose if you wanted to do that, you do it in a dog park, but the other option is you just don't take the dog along, right? That's the home of Paul and Nicola. And doesn't that show someone who has created a home, created a place that is cared for, and a lot of care and love and attention has gone into that? Look at that beautiful Christmas tree. And so we do want to know what are the water dynamics, what are they, what can they tell us in this inquest about the river that we didn't already know? Is something like that going to come out? These are all photos she took. She took that photo. She took that photo. That someone who's paying attention to her surroundings and someone who's doing that is, in touch with the world. They're not overcome with despair. Was the terrain slippery? And I mean, we all know England is rainy, right? Was the terrain slippery? And she was sitting right in front of a very steep, slippery, muddy slope. We know that. Right. Is the evidence not right in front of us, this muddy slope? Bear in mind, it was early in the morning in winter, when it's sort of dewy and damp. Here again, we've just got confirmation of how steep this embankment is. But, you know, in a scenario where she fell in by accident, would it really have been so hard to try to clamber up there? Or is that really so steep? And it's just across the river. Is that really so steep? And so there still are questions. Some things still don't seem to completely add up. Okay, how far are we? 20 minutes. Do we get any crucial information in these last images we have of Nicola? I've always thought that over there, isn't that a tennis ball? Isn't that the edge of a tennis ball sort of poking out? I don't think that is what her, I don't think that is the inside of her hoodie. Isn't that the isn't that a ball? And so was that ball still in the vehicle? I don't know if you guys know her Mercedes fob, basically the car keys, and her Fitbit watch. They were found with her. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. But yeah, they were wondering where her keys were while they were found with her. Fitbit watch as well. Fitbit watch showed no additional activity until whatever 20 past. It's actually quite interesting if you think about, wouldn't that watch show the real last steps that she took? Apparently not. Anyway, so here's another picture of Nicola, Willow, and the ball. And one does wonder, is this the fabric of this case? Is it about Nicola, a dog, and a ball, and maybe wet grass on a steep slope? Is that the whole story here? From this angle, you can appreciate just how steep it is from this bench all the way down. Now, if you're sitting there by yourself, it's not very steep. You just sit on the bench and everything's fine. But if you've got a dog with you and the dog's possibly got a ball and the dog takes the ball out of your hand, then that changes that whole dynamic quite significantly. Again, can you see how steep is it really on the other side of this bank? If you fell in the water here, would you really be unable to get out? And is it really as simple as that? So that was my assessment quite early on when we couldn't find Nicola. It seemed that foul play is quite likely. Well, where are we now? Is foul play still quite likely? And I mean, this statement was really based on, we haven't been able to find Nicola for how long? So does that mean foul play? Or does it mean we're not good at looking in the water? What does it mean? Again, is this what we're dealing with? Nicola, a dog, and where's the tennis ball? Loris Warenko says just joining. Pat Hanbury says, what is the temperature that day? Well, they say the water temperature was 4 degrees Celsius, which is very close to freezing. Yeah, is a temperature graph. The 27th was fairly average. I think that's air temperature. The air temperature was between about 3 and about 9 or 10. So it was pretty average. Were Paul and Nicola a happy couple? Were they getting along? Was he having an affair? Was she having an affair? In a true crime case, you really want to ask these questions. In this case, did you guys know that he did call her several times prior to calling 911, what's not 911, 999, he did actually call several times. We're going to deal with that in a moment. We know he gave an interview. Some people didn't found what he said strange. He may have, I don't want to call it guilty knowledge, but he may have knowledge that not everything was hunky-dory in paradise, that she was struggling. But that doesn't mean that he's guilty of something. It means he knows something that is confidential, and he's got every right to keep it private to some extent. But I think a lot of us were projecting a Chris Watts onto him. Do you agree? And then even he was wrong to say he's 100% sure she's not in the river. And probably because he thought she wouldn't have fallen in, so it wouldn't have been an accident, and she wouldn't have thrown herself in, and that was his thinking. And so the search went on and on and on, and eventually, after about 23 days, she was found. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the inquest, starting with the timeline of events. I don't know if you guys remember. By the way, this is from the Lancashire Post. I'll put a link to this in chat if you also want to follow. Please pardon my dog for snoring. He's very comfortable, I think. Amy says, I think she was shoved into the river. If she was shoved into the river, she probably would have showed signs of injury, and there might also been scuff marks and skidding on the side, but I guess that's another possibility. One's also going to say who would have shoved her, and didn't the CCTV pick up that person? Jane says, glad you're going through the inquest. I've not heard it. Okay, so can you guys see that? Let's just make it a bit bigger. Okay. She leaves home at 8:26 a.m. She gets to the path at 8:43. All of this is pretty normal. At 8:50, she sees a dog walker. Their pets interact. They part ways. So that's not just passing someone. There'll be a little bit of an encounter there where someone can get a sense of her effect, and it'd probably be a little bit of a short conversation. 8:53, Nicola sends an email to her boss, followed by a message to her friend 6 minutes later. All of that is almost normal early beginning of the day business activity. Right on time, she logs on for a Teams call. Now, I think it would have been quite suspicious if she had a scheduled call at 9:01 and she wasn't there. She didn't log on. So the fact that she logs on is part of a normal day for her, right? Then she's on that call for 10 minutes when the second witness leaves that area and no longer sees her. Then it says 9:20, her phone was back in the area of the bench, and the Teams call ended 10 minutes later, but her mobile remained logged on after the call. 9:33, another dog walker found her phone with her dog darting between the bench and the river. So her dog was not just sitting there, he was agitated. He was running between the bench and the phone. And bear in mind, it's quite a steep slope. Then at 10:50, the alarm was raised. That's just a review of that. And so just to repeat what I said earlier, tomorrow's witnesses are going to be Paul Ansell and her sister, Paul and Louise Cunningham. Okay. Excuse me. Okay, now we're going to deal with the pertinent facts from the inquest. We had 30 minutes in. I hope everyone's here. Let's get going. I think I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to do it like this. Maybe not. Maybe I'll do it the other way around. Okay. So the first thing that stood out to me was this information. It's from the Lancashire Post, talking about witnesses who heard a scream, right? And the two witnesses, the one is a nurse called Helen O'Neill. She described how shortly after 9:30 she heard a scream. Well, that's exactly the time that is it exactly the time that we're looking at? Because the Teams call ended at 9:30, and if the Teams call ended at 9:30, surely she would have logged off. But it is very close to the time that we think something happened to her, between 9:20 and 9:30. She says, I pictured in my head it was two females, teenagers, walking on the river path, and one jumped out on the other. Right? So she heard a scream and she even pictured it in her mind. Now you might say, maybe she was wrong. Maybe she imagined it. Except there was another person, a second person who heard a scream as well. Veronica Clayson from a local tennis club. She said she heard the brief scream and thought it was children having fun at the back of the graveyard. And she also said it sounded like something that was like the element of surprise. And so if you think about that, you have two separate witnesses, both of whom interpreted the scream to be someone shouting in surprise. And couldn't that have been Nicola in a, let's say, an innocent scenario, going after a ball and then realizing, oh no, I'm going to fall into the river, and then that's when the scream came out. Does that make sense? Do you guys agree with that? In other words, it was a scream of surprise. It was unintentional for all intents or purposes. That is so true, you know. So you hear a scream, someone has raised the alarm, someone has heard it, someone else has heard it. They're right there and they need help, but I think it might be something else. So I think the lesson we learn from this is, when you hear a scream, maybe pay a bit more attention to it than you normally would, right? I think it's a good thing to ask the true crime community. In future, if you hear a scream, maybe do something. Just find out, go to where you heard it, or ask somebody something. Who knows? There you go. And the other thing is this idea of a quick scream. What could cause a scream to be cut off? Well, falling in water, where the water itself actually prevents the rest of the scream from forming. I don't know if you guys know, in the John Benet Ramsey case, there's also a scream that somebody said was cut off. Well, what could cut that off? Well, either being hit on the head or being choked. That could also cut it off. That would actually make sense, right? The other thing to consider is, when she was actually in the water, why did she not scream then? And there could be a couple of possibilities. One is she was shocked. She was in a state of shock. She was gasping for breath. She banged her head, and then there's another pretty unpleasant thought, but I'll deal with that in a second. Okay. So this is my opinion. You may disagree with it, but I already think this is strongly indicative that Nicola didn't go into the water voluntarily or willingly, right? If she screamed, it means I don't want it, it's a surprise. I didn't know this was going to happen, right? And so, what is likely there? Well, someone said that she could have been pushed, but there's nothing came up on CCTV. And then the other one is she fell in by accident, but either way, it was a surprise. Bear in mind, you could have a third sort of sub scenario where she was heading intentionally towards the river. For example, perhaps to put a harness onto the dog or to chase after a tennis ball that is now bouncing down this ravine. And it's not just any tennis ball, it's a beloved tennis ball that a dog is obsessed over. And she may have thought the tennis ball goes into the water, the dog's going to go in the water, something like that. So I've got to get a hold of this tennis ball. And then she falls into the river. You know, like never a good deed goes unpunished. So she may have intended to head towards the river. And that brings up the next question. So where is the ball? If the ball is part of the story, where is the ball? Where is that? A very quiet morning. So this is quite an important thing as well. If someone had said, you know what, it was a very there was a lot of cacophony that morning. You know, there were kids screaming. A bunch of joggers went by laughing, whatever. Then you'd say, well, maybe you imagined the scream. But the fact that it was a quiet morning, there was some peak hour traffic, obviously. But besides that, and it's a small town, you would have a scenario where in the quiet, people would hear a scream because it's a fairly quiet neighborhood, not too many cars, not too many houses, and quite a lot of nature. And then could that piercing sound have traveled? And maybe it did. Then there it is. Where was the ball? Claire Chesham says she's had them there on previous occasions, but on that day I did not see any evidence of her having one with Willow. If I was in court, I would want a bit more than that. I would say, on what previous occasions? So, you know, when was the last time Nicola was there with the ball, right? And I think one's also got to think about it in the reverse. If there was no ball and Nicola was preoccupied with a Teams, you know, with a Zoom meeting, what would her dog have done? Would her dog have sat obediently next to her? Would her dog have wanted her perhaps to throw a branch? You know, so think about the ball narrative also in the reverse. Sherry says it's a Springer, they're hunters, they protect their owners. You know, there's also another very simple possibility is that while she's sitting there, her dog gets bored, her dog kind of is sniffing around, sniffing the smells of other dogs, sniffing for ducks, sniffing for squirrels, whatever it is. And the dog then starts venturing very close to that embankment. And that is what prompts her to get up because she imagines that the dog is going to fall in or that the dog is in trouble. And maybe the dog was in trouble, started falling in and then scrambled back up. And then, but it got her it triggered her to get up and sort of almost launch herself towards the dog, right? That's also a good point, except I think the phone was on the bench. So the impression I get was she was sitting on the bench looking at the phone and then actually even had time to put the phone down on the bench and do whatever happened after that. But that is a definite possibility to think about. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. Okay, so now we go to the next thing, the final activity on her phone. But before I get to that, I just want to mention something else here. Um, I went to America in April and May. I went to Delphi, Indiana. I went down to the, is it the Snake River? Can't actually remember. Anyway, I went down to that river, walked in the river. I was also quite surprised. I was surprised the river was so shallow. I was also surprised that it was moving fairly quickly. But I was more surprised by any. I wasn't. The thing that surprised me the most was just how steep the topography was, and how if you went around the corner with the river, the shielding you would be getting wasn't really from trees, but it was from the lie of the land itself. And I think that's exactly what you have with Nicola Bulley's. I think the soundproofing, once she fell into the river, was from the lie of the land. Look how high these walls are on either side. And if you down there and you're shouting, it's going to be hard for that sound to travel up and then horizontally. Does that make sense? So it could even be that Nicola screamed after she was in the river. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But if she did, it would be harder to hear because the sound is now, what's the word? It's got a harder job to travel out of that trench effectively. If that makes sense. We still wonder, is this about running after a tennis ball? Just want to see if I can find another good picture of the side. That also gives you a good idea of if you're down there, you can almost imagine if this guy's down here and he's calling to someone over there, are they going to hear him? The sound's going to go up and then that way, up and then that way. Anyway, okay, so let's go on to the next thing. Final activity on her phone. So that I also find very interesting is the fact that her phone was still, she didn't like end the call. It seemed like whatever she was doing was interrupted by something unexpected. Nicola's phone was live, according to Penny Fletcher. There was no sound, but she could see male faces on the screen. Now, one reason why there might be no sound is if she had, headphones. And you would imagine that on a call like that, she would want it to sort of be private. And people had seen her with earphones on previously. And so the fact that she seemed to be in the middle of a Zoom call when this happens and her phone is lying on the bench, doesn't that suggest a sudden triggering thing that gets her to stand up? And isn't the dog part of that? Isn't the dog somehow part of that? Okay. Right. She did have an injury. The wound to her nose was apparently inflicted post-mortem. Now, I found that information and then I tried to find it over here and I wasn't able to find it. So let's see if we can find it right now. See if we can find it right now on this website. Let's go back to page 6. Can you guys see that? So we're just going randomly through some of the coverage, aerial shots and images of the scene. The the drop from the bench, that was the center of the search, down to the water. PC Matthew Thackeray, he was a police diver with 8 years of experience. The cause of death was that she was alive when she entered the water. No indication that she was assaulted or harmed or of any third-party involvement. Nicola did have a very small amount of alcohol in her system, so it's the same almost as the cut to the bridge of her nose. You might say, oh my God, she had alcohol in her system, but it's consistent with the post-mortem process involving bacteria, right? Then she says, in my opinion, she had no alcohol in her bloodstream. And I do think if there was clear signs of alcohol, then you could say, I think she was depressed and wanted to take her own life. And also that she was trying to minimize the pain and the suffering of what she was about to do, right? Or you could even say that she wasn't in her right mind, but none of that is the case here. Bear in mind, again, the scream runs counter to this whole idea of that she intentionally did something. The scream indicates that what happened was a surprise, right? I just want to thank Jane from the country. Thanks a lot, Jane. Mrs. Tab says, it depends what the scream was like. If a short, sharp scream, that could be shock of slipping. Yeah. I think that's what many of us are thinking here. That's right. That's right. Then there it is. Okay. She had a wound to the bridge of her nose and eye, but evidence suggests that came post-mortem. Now, I would personally prefer a little bit more information than that, but I'll accept that. Oh, here it is. Dr. Armour says that in her examination, Nicola's face, particularly her forehead and hair, were covered in mud. And to me, this is potentially a very important insight. Why? Why is that? Why is that potentially an important insight? So her face, her forehead, and hair were covered in mud, but not her shoulders, not the back of her head. And so what is that potentially telling us? I personally think that one possibility here is that she fell, right? And they say that the area right below the bench in the water isn't really that deep, 3 foot deep. And if she fell unexpectedly, if she slipped and fell and it was a surprise, right? Then she may have hit the bottom of the river with her face, and that mud actually caked around her eyes, which effectively blinded her. So in other words, you may have a situation where she wasn't concussed, she wasn't knocked out, she wasn't really injured. She was literally blinded. So she's literally falls in the river, and the next thing it's completely black. And she doesn't know that it's mud. She may think that she's deep underwater, or because she's in shock, she doesn't really know what's going on, but she's now blinded. And so how do you rescue yourself, even if you're in shallow water? How do you rescue yourself if you can't see where the light is? You can't see where up or down is. Basically, you just can't see. And that is also one way to silence someone. And what I mean is, I don't know if it's a good analogy to say this, but if you want to silence a little bird, if a little bird is making a noise, you put a towel over its cage, right? But if someone is in this situation and they can see as they're falling in water and they are what's the word? They are frightened and they aware at least of what is happening. But as soon as she was in the water, if she had sort of mud over her face or over her eyes, sticky mud, but she didn't necessarily realize that, or she couldn't get it off. And another possibility is even that the mud or the dirt got into her eyes, and so now you can't see because you've got dirt in your eyes, right? Um, that's going to complicate everything else. And are you going to really be screaming when you're blinded? Because your number one priority is now, I need to get to the surface, but I can't even see the surface, right? And so that's, I think, in a way, possibly the X factor that none of us really knew or appreciated is what could have caused her to be suddenly and immediately compromised from something as simple and harmless, in inverted commas, harmless as a fall into a river like that. Now, why would you die from a fall into a river like that? Well, if you were blinded and you fell into mud and you couldn't see, that would be one way for that to happen. And I can tell you, I did a triathlon, half Ironman swim in Durban, South Africa. And there were huge breakers, there were huge waves, um, washing us into the sea. There'd been a big storm. And I was completely aware of the big waves, just like she was aware that there is an embankment, right? But the next thing, the wave caught me a little by surprise. Although I knew the wave was there, this big wave caught me and it dumped me. And it happened so quickly, I didn't even have time to take a breath before it happened. So I didn't have a time to go, and then sort of get churned by the wave. And so I went through a very horrible period where I was turning like a starfish. I was turning like a starfish in this wave, but I was completely blind. I couldn't tell which way is up or down. It was a mixture of black and brown and white, but I really couldn't tell which way was up. And this happened very, very quickly, and I had so little oxygen left. Even though I'm quite a good swimmer, I basically said, okay, I can only hold my breath for about 3 seconds, and then I'm not going to make it. And it was like one. I still didn't know where up was or down was. I didn't know in which direction to swim, and I'm still kind of doing this. Two, and I still couldn't see anything. I didn't know in which direction to go. Three, and at the end of that three, I was about to take a breath, and then I just popped out. I didn't locomote myself towards the surface. I just popped out, and I was like, I have to breathe now. And as I breathed, I popped out. And I mean, I thought, wow, if it had been a quarter of a second earlier, I don't know if I would have drowned because I was like at full stretch. But there was a situation, and I'd lost my goggles, obviously. And when I came out the water, there was just goggles all around me. But there was a situation where I was a strong swimmer and I was compromised because I was blind in the water, right? And it was also a surprise. So, isn't that a potential analogy for what happened to her? What did Stephanie say? Wolfie says maybe she was hung up in the water in a muddy place for a few days. Yeah, no, that's definitely the other possibility, is that could have happened post-mortem as well, right? That she, yeah, I mean, that's definitely another possibility. Or it could be both, that she fell into the water in a wave face first, got some mud on her, and then later on got hung up in debris somewhere else. That's also possible. What did Stephanie say? Everyone's talking about it. Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, I mean, I was the only one. I wasn't as fit as I wanted to be. If you're fit enough, you can handle something like that. Okay, so let's continue. So I'm glad I found that. I actually couldn't. I found it and I couldn't find it. So the next thing we want to look at is Nicola's effect, and this is actually really important. What did Nicola seem like that morning? Was she nervous? Was she anxious? Was she looking over her shoulder? And she seemed normal. She seemed like any other day on the school run. And the witness said she was how I would normally know her. Her mannerisms were normal. I had a chat with Nikki about dogs. I'd also would like to know more about that, but there you have it. And so that alone suggests it's not conclusive, but it suggests that she wasn't depressed or anxious. I know if I'm not feeling in a good mood, I don't really want to talk to someone, even if I'm walking my dog. You might make an effort to avoid someone. You might walk the other way, or and the fact that she didn't do that suggests she was in a normal mood, a normal frame of mind. The fact that she was on a Zoom call seems to indicate that she was in a normal mood, normal frame of mind, doesn't it? Okay. So, did you guys know that Paul Ansel called 999? He actually made 6 attempts to call Nicola, and that's actually good for us to see. That's good to see. If he knew she was struggling, then it makes sense that he would make a call, that he would call, and he did call. And that whole struggling narrative is here. Let me quickly read this. Sue came across Anne Marie Fletcher, Penny's daughter-in-law, who recognized Nicola from the picture and called the school. Anne Marie managed to get hold of Paul on the phone. Sue said Anne Marie was on the phone to Paul, and when she came off the phone, she said Paul had said she is struggling. And then Paul arrived at the scene about 10 minutes later. And so the question then arises, had Paul not called her by then? If Paul knew that she was struggling, did he not call Nicola when she didn't arrive home, like on schedule? And so this kind of addresses that question. Unable to get hold of his partner, Paul called 999 at 11 a.m. At 11:10, Paul arrives at the bench where the others have gathered, having found Willow and the phone. Now, if we go below that, call details show Paul Ansel tried to ring Nicola 6 times between 10:40, so basically an hour after she disappeared, which isn't really that long, right? It's really not that long to phone someone and say what's going on. He called her 6 times between 10:40 and 10:47. So he didn't call her at 10:40 and then call her again at 11 or whatever. He phoned her consistently. It's like, and you kind of get the idea that she was a creature of habit, and also that she was someone who would answer her phone if you called her. I mean, she was going to do a Zoom call. She had to have had her phone with her, and she did. And then he also sent her a WhatsApp message. And I think the WhatsApp message is even more revealing, because it shows it's delivered, but she didn't open it or whatever. Then at 10:50, Anne Marie Fletcher calls St. Michael's School, having found the phone but not knowing how to get hold of Paul. 10:54, a member of staff calls Paul, informing him. And can you see all of this is before? All of his calls are before this happens, which suggests that he is concerned, which suggests he is aware of her struggles and is a caring, concerned partner, right? It's not as though he's working and someone calls him and then suddenly he realizes, oh, I better make a call kind of thing. He does call 999 at 11 a.m. after all of those calls and after this information comes through. And that makes complete sense. It would also not make sense if he called 999 at 10:40, like just out of the blue. That wouldn't have made sense. This does kind of make sense. Paul calls Anne-Marie Fletcher at 10:57, the one where he informs her that Nikki has been struggling. And then he calls the police. Okay. So obviously this reference to struggling is the first sign or symptom of another possible explanation for Nicola's death in terms of this narrative, in terms of the inquest narrative. And it's important now to connect the deeper context and psychology to the fabric. What was going on that day? What was going on the previous day? What was going on generally? Is there any link to what is going on? Was it very serious? Was she struggling with it? Were those screams heard? And this is where it becomes quite pertinent to think critically. Were those screams heard, Nicola's screams, or not? So quite a lot rests on that question. If those weren't Nicola's screams, then what are we talking about? But could two people have made the same mistake at the same time on the same day? Nellie says, I find it odd he was 100% convinced she wasn't in the river. I think that is wishful thinking. I think he's thinking she's not that stupid, or she's not that clumsy, or she's not, if she did fall in, she would have been able to get out, which is what a lot of us would have thought. Wolfie says, I think I recall that they had a routine where they took turns going places or something like that. Well, I think she would typically be back by 10:30 or something. Bear in mind, if you think about it, he was going to go to gym, I think, at 10:30 or 11, and that may also be part of the reason he phoned when he phoned. But the other thing is her Zoom call ended at 9:30. So I think she should have been home between 9:30 and 10, more likely 9:45, 10, something like that. Does that make sense? And I think, when you've got kids and you've got a job and your partner's got a job, you tend to be creatures of habit. Kathy says, what if he had a hit? I'm not actually going to read that. Yeah, that's right. That's also correct. Yeah, I mean, that's also part of his answer. Okay. And so now we're going to deal a little bit with the water dynamics. The water looks calm in the video. The water looks calm in what we saw. It looks like a very lazy river, doesn't it? But I did some research into that aspect, and the impression one got was that this is a very temperamental river, that it can flood, it can move very quickly, the level can go up and down, but just the shape of the what do you call it? The shape of the riverbed, I don't know if that's the right term, but means it's almost like a canal shape that is going to get the water to flow even faster than a quote unquote normal river. The tidal aspect also adds an element, the weirs also add an element to that. But here's the important part. There was a downstream flow that was twice as fast. So a little bit around the corner, the river was flowing a lot quicker than what you see right there. But I do think the flow becomes almost irrelevant for Nicola herself if you're in a situation that you blinded after you fall in. Then I think, I mean, you could also get blinded by concussion. If you fall in the water and you knock yourself out, and bear in mind, you can also knock yourself out hitting your head on hard mud. It might not leave any kind of bruise, although I would expect if you hit your head hard enough that you concussed, that you would get a bruise. But um, I personally don't think that the speed of the water is really a factor here for her. I think it is the surprise going in and then possibly mud having some kind of impact. Then he says something, if she fell in accidentally, cold water shock would probably have taken effect. I kind of feel like I've got a better explanation than that. I think cold water shock is a factor. And I mean, you could have a situation of falling in and that triggering something else, a seizure. And maybe if there's a medical report and maybe she had panic attacks or something, what do you call it? Asthma, something like that, that could trigger something else. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Being blinded by mud in your eyes, I don't think that's quite a compelling argument, given what we know, given what has been found. Candace says puffer jacket. That's what possibly made it difficult to get out once she was in. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Mel says, I think she fell in the water head first and knocked herself out. But the thing is, they didn't find any contusions. I mean, the closest was a cut over the bridge of her nose. Maybe that is what it was, but maybe it wasn't. Heavy clothing could have weighed her down. It's possible. Yeah, there's a good summary. Is the inquest being live streamed? No, but I think it is being live tweeted. Yeah, that's also true. I think if she had a heart attack, that would come up in the autopsy. I think that would be kind of obvious, right? Wolfie says, shock, heavy, wet clothing, panic, mud. Yeah. Okay. So what's the next thing? On the day that it happened, it's believed, I think I've said this earlier, the water was 4 degrees Celsius, and basically that very cold water would basically just have put it this way, if Nicola had fallen into that river now, like tomorrow morning or yesterday morning, whatever, in the midsummer in England, first of all, I think the river would have been a bit lower, I'm guessing, but also the water would have been a lot less cold, and that then allows you some room to fight back or deal with the circumstances in a way that I think are a little bit more survivable. Anyway, okay. Wolfie, thank you so much. I'll give Timmy a snack. I've actually got macaroni in the oven right now. It's on a lowish setting, but I do need to go and sort it out. Okay, and now let's deal with the water flow is something many have underestimated. or simply gotten wrong. We've seen people get the water thing wrong in the Kylie Rodney case. In the Mallory Beach case, it took how long to find Mallory? A week. I'm trying to think of another case involving water. The water flow is something that may have helped hide Nicola from view, but also made it difficult for her to recover or find her bearings after falling in. It's also possible Nicola fell in accidentally and then suffered from a complication, a seizure, or just ordinary shock or panic. Of course, the water flow could also be the reason why someone might intentionally take their own life because they don't want their body found, as we saw with Virginia Woolf. But there are a couple of things that seem to indicate that that's not the case here. For example, there's a plan for drinks. And this plan for drinks suggests that the dark shadow hanging over Nicola's life about struggles, about menopause and so on, wasn't that dark, wasn't that bad. Because she had a plan. She was going to have a play date for the kids on the Saturday afternoon. And Lucy Musella was planning to join, said that Nicola was planning to join other mums for drinks on Saturday night. I don't know the details there that much to say, did she initiate that invitation, that arrangement? It's, if she did, then that would be pretty compelling. Or did she just respond to that? I don't know. But it sounds like they're saying Nicola was planning to join other mums for drinks. I don't know whether that means it was her idea in the first place. Somehow I don't think so, but still. And then there's also this message. By the way, thanks, Sherry Davis. Thank you. I'm quite surprised. I don't think anyone from the UK have given me a super chat. Is that because the folks in the UK don't like my analysis? Just wondering. Just curious. Anyway, then there's this Facebook message. Lucy Musella, she's a waitress. She contacted Nicola on January 27 with regards to their kids getting together to play the day after. So it was, and that's what sort of goes into that. Stephanie says, I'm leaning more towards accident now. It'll be interesting to hear from her doctor tomorrow. Yeah, it will be. I'm not really prepared to say that, Stephanie. I'll tell you why. The first reason is the police described Nicola as, what is their word? Vulnerable. Can you remember that? The police described Nicola as vulnerable, and the other thing was, what is the other thing? That there was quite a lot of discussion about that nobody wants to talk about the premenopausal thing and the alcohol and all of that kind of thing. And I don't think you should say, I don't want to know anything about that stuff. I think you need to evaluate it and say, well, just how serious was that? And so I think one's got to be careful. Bear in mind, an accident is by its very nature a fragment of life that catches you by surprise and is in some ways random, right? An accident, a true accident, is surprising and is a bit of an aberration. But the counter narrative to that is Nicola did go to that park very often. And Nicola did go to the park with her dog very often. Nicola probably did sit at that bench very often. So had Nicola never been down that embankment before? And so the other thing is the wellness check 17 days earlier. Is that just a bad, untimely coincidence? And in true crime, you've got to be careful accepting things as coincidences. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. Thanks, Magical Mother. James says your analysis is high level. Okay, thanks a lot. I'm glad that that you are on board with what I'm saying. I appreciate it. I'm not sure what you mean, Linda. Didn't her family say at a funeral, "Don't give up on your dreams"? So you know that thing about where the police said that they worried that she's vulnerable. That's the one thing that I think one's got to be aware of. I've got to say I'm a little confused by in terms of the inquest. It's really tearing me almost through the middle because the screams are very compelling for an accident. Her effect and also Paul's behavior. He seems like a caring partner. All of it seems to show a certain thing. And then the part we don't know is just how serious was her struggle that he also mentions. Okay, is there anything else I want to go into here? So, yeah, just to summarize, let me pull up another image. Um, I think there's a much stronger probability, having heard additional evidence, that this could be a tragic accident. The screams, if they were from Nicola, are pretty compelling evidence of an accident, of something happening to someone by surprise. Now, you might say, no, 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 no. That could also be compelling evidence of foul play, that she screamed and because something else was happening that was surprising. And I'm pretty sure fake crimers are going to be telling that story. She screamed because someone was attacking her. The problem with that argument is the CCTV doesn't pick anyone up. The autopsy doesn't show any um, signs, obvious signs of murder. There's no um, knife wound, there's no gunshot wound, there's no ligature strangulation, there's no sexual aspect, blah, blah, blah. But then those same fake tubers will say, yeah, but the thing across the nose shows she was struck in the face. If you really want to make that argument, I suppose you could. Um, but then, so what's the motive? Who did it? Where's the suspect? Why don't her family even think that there's a murderer? And then, I mean, the number one thing is this is an inquest, it's not a murder trial. Um, why did nobody see anyone that's supposedly a suspect? Why does Nicola not have any enemies? Who gained through this? What did the criminal who did this gain? He didn't gain anything sexually. He didn't take her phone. He didn't take her money. Um, what did he? What? So what's the point of the whole thing? And I get how it is hard to believe that it was an accident because you'd think she's a 45-year-old beautiful woman. She seems quite fit and strong. Surely that couldn't happen to someone. And I guess that's the thing one's got to think about, that accidents can happen to you. Bear in mind also, in true crime, we tend to think everything is murder and lies and deception, and it wasn't the case in the Kylie Rodney case, um, right? And one's got to be careful, even with the submersible thing. Sometimes accidents happen. Sometimes someone does something unintentionally. Sometimes people ignore information. It's not necessarily because someone's evil all the time. The other thing that Paul Ansel said was that she was a strong swimmer. So how could a strong swimmer succumb? And I've just given you a little bit of a story how I almost succumbed. But think about it, the conditions were clearly there for an accident. One, a steep, muddy, slippery slope. 2, ice cold water, 3, water moving relatively fast, 4, idiosyncrasies of the topography making it hard to see or save someone or hear someone in the river, and then that same steepness from the river if you want to get out, right? If you've fallen in, it's the same steepness, not being able to get out. But if you take the first thing that I mentioned, the steep, muddy, slippery slope, I wonder if the number one clue that we've all missed isn't the muddiness. Just look at this picture. Is there not muddiness down there? And that is what she got onto her face. And caked around her eyes, and she wasn't able to see that muddiness. Isn't there like muddiness down there? Could she have fallen almost down there, right? And then tipped into the water? And you have this really black mud right over here. And that's definitely something I hadn't really thought about in as much detail as we are now. So that to me definitely is a possibility. What's my final word on the subject? Just how bad was Nicola's mental health or depression? Well, we're going to hear about that tomorrow. And so we're going to be hearing from Nicola Bulley's partner, Paul Ansell, and Louise Cunningham. And I personally think that they probably have the best, well, they may have the best explanation now what they think is the situation. Do they, I mean, she was found in the river. What do they think happened? Given the fact that they knew her and given that they've heard all of the evidence so far, what do they think? Or will Paul say, you know what, I still don't believe that she could have fallen into the river. She was a strong swimmer, blah, blah, blah. So we'll see what they say. Josie says accident. Tammy says, I'm not buying it. Kathy says, not foul play then. Well, let's have a look at what you guys have voted. See what you guys have voted. I do know that some of you have probably been on another channel. So 39% say it's a conspiracy / cover-up. Well, I must say when I flew back from America, I was sitting next to a British couple, and I asked them, what do you think happened with Nicola Bulley? And the woman said, it's her partner. No doubt about it. She was absolutely convinced that she was murdered and who committed the crime. So yeah. So again, I think you've got to think about Stockton Rush and his attitude to information, and also, or some of us doing the same thing here. You just ignore, if it's not what you want to hear, do you just ignore it? If it's not what you believe, do you just ignore it? Is that what's happening here? Kathy says it's, yeah, but you must remember, Kathy, we are in true crime. And so in true crime, you see murders all the time. You see situations like the Corey Richards case, where you see couples cheating, but you see it all in a situation where it's already at a murder trial level. And so, of course, it's lying, cheating, and deception. And now you're in a situation where something happens in real time, and the question is, what happened here? Well, just because it's true crime doesn't mean it's always murder. If somebody disappears doesn't mean it's always murder. In the Kylie Rodney case, it wasn't murder. But true crime wants it to be that because then they've got something to talk about. Right. In point of fact, and I mean, think about the submersible thing and even the Rust incident. If it's not a criminal thing, it's not really any of our business. If it's an accident, it's not really any of our business. So I think there is an incentive to make it a crime for many people, many creators in the true crime community. That's why I said not every time. Well, Mrs. Tab says, this discussion has swayed me towards it being an accident. That's interesting. Well, I hope it's not so much this discussion, but what has come out in the inquest, because I'm really just telling you what's in the inquest. But bear in mind, there's another day to go, so we do want to pay attention to that. Well, I must say I'm really grateful that somebody in the UK is like validating my efforts. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Robbie Robin. TMCB says it's too random for murder. I mean, if it was murder, what did the murderer get? What did he want? What did he take? What is the motive? Who is he? You can't answer any of those questions. Thanks a lot, Karina. Amy says the toxicology showed a therapeutic amount of beta blocker and only trace amounts of alcohol. Yeah, I mean, they did actually find, was it paracetamol? But they found small amounts of certain kinds of drugs in the system. Let me see if I can find that. See if I can find that, because it is kind of pertinent. By the way, while I was researching this broadcast, I was trying to remember, did they find water in Kylie Rodney's lungs? What do you think the answer is to that? So they found water in Nicola Bulley's lungs. Did they find water in Kylie Rodney's lungs? Just give me a second. I'm just going through the information here. So I might as well share this with you. It says here, in my opinion, given the nature of the likely entry into the water, I would suggest Nikki had a gasp response under the water, initiating the drowning process. And he says, on the balance of probability, there's a fairly rapid incapacitation. I don't really believe that, to be honest. I don't think there's a gasp response. I mean, there could have been. But, and I mean, in cold water, it's more likely to have that response. And then she would have been in trouble. That would also explain why she couldn't scream after that. He also says you could lose consciousness in just 48 seconds. Only 20 to 30 seconds of that would be functional consciousness. That's quite a long time. 20 to 30 seconds means you can scream for 20 to 30 seconds. Of course, if you've had that gasp response, who knows? Considering Nicola's size, it would have taken 1 of 2 breaths in of the water to be a lethal dose for drowning. So there you have it. I personally don't think I would drown from swallowing water. I think I would drown by not breathing, holding the air back. That's me personally. On the day Nicola was last seen, the deepest part of the water was 4.6 meters. I don't really know why they don't say how shallow it was. But anyway, I want to just get to the toxicology. So it says here, DC Thackeray is in bits of the river wire where it is too deep to stand. He doesn't need to swim though, and is being pushed along by the flow of the water, which he says is at a gentle walking pace. But the issue to me is not where is it too deep to stand, but where is it shallow. His theory is that Nicola fell into the water, seized up, and then floated downstream. Okay, we've covered that. I just want to go to the what they found in a. I think it's right at. I think it's page 1. Let's just go over there. All of this is from the Lancashire Post. I think there's one more page. And to me, one of the biggest revelations was the screaming. I would have thought that that would have been in the media, that that would have been reported. So there you have it. Along with the Mercedes car keys, a Fitbit watch was recovered from Nicola's body. Between 8:30 and 9:30, it recorded all of those steps. After 9:30, no further steps. So it seems like she may have died right at the end of that Zoom call. GPS data found on her phone. Phone was intact, no sign it had been in the water. Just trying to see where is the part about the toxicology, or have I passed it? I think I've passed it. Anyway, they found something else in a system, small amounts of some other medication. I think it's paracetamol. Yeah. And didn't someone say a beta blocker, which I think is basically vitamins? Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. That's a good point. Lisa Breck, good to see you. The slope on the muddy, slippery bank was quite steep. Is it possible she hit her head? That is what we're thinking. That is what we're thinking. Okay, I'm not going to take it any further than that. I've got macaroni in the stove. The heating is quite low, but I need to check it out. I hope you found this worth doing. I mean, we did cover this case. We want some kind of sense of understanding what we've looked at and what we thought about. What is really interesting about this case to me is how you need to keep an open mind. You need to consider, and I mean, look how far we are into it. It's more than 6 months. You need to keep an open mind, right? And it also helps you to think in a way that's definitely different. Water dynamics, terrain, dog behavior, things like that. It's definitely, I found it definitely an exercise worthy of doing. Thanks a lot, Lisa. Terry says beta blockers block adrenaline. Okay. Don't they do something else as well? They cause the heart to beat more slowly. Maybe used also to help control blood pressure, anxiety, maybe. It's also used to control irregular heartbeat. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see if more information comes out about that. Zircon said, I thought an antidepressant. Okay, so I'll be back tomorrow, this time, dealing with the second part of the inquest. If there's something to report, I mean, if it's going to be straightforward, then I'm not really going to do that. But I've got an idea we are going to learn more. So look out for part 2 on this channel. Thanks very much for the super chats. Also, mods, thank you so much for being here, especially Stephanie. I was actually anticipating a lot more arguing and argy-bargy, and I really I'm grateful for you guys being so well-mannered and civilized, even if you disagree. Let's try and do it in a nice, thoughtful, sensitive way. I just saw a name that I haven't seen before. London lady, good to see you. Is Victoria not here? Maybe she did have high blood pressure. Magical Mother says, I take a beta blocker for high blood pressure. Okay. Magical, okay, there we go. So it could be for that. Okay, thanks a lot. I think we need to say goodbye to Timmy. Timmy, come. Timmy, come, boy. If you guys haven't looked at my coverage, those folks in the UK who have just been following the Nicola Bulley case, if you haven't watched my coverage of the submersible, it really is interesting. There are so many levels to that as well. We also want to see whether the CEO was honest, and that's definitely a question that I'm starting to wonder about. Is he a good guy? Is he honest? We know he spent a lot of time and attention on marketing materials, but basically, was he an honest guy? And if he was ignoring the safety stuff, what else was he selective about in terms of his reality? That'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see if we are going to have a civil case in this case, or a criminal case, or both. Are we going to have the North Atlantic version of the Rust incident? It'll be really interesting to see. Stephanie says, I'm watching my nephew the rest of the week. I'll try to be here where I can. Okay. Thanks a lot. If you can, that'll be great. Timmy, come. Come, boy. It's time for your cameo. Come. Come, boy. Come. I don't hear anything. I think it is cold now. It definitely is quite cold. 7 degrees Celsius. Timmy, come. Here he comes. Come, boy. Come, boy, come. I need to wrap up, so you need to appear. Come. There's Timmy. He's nice and warm. I'm looking forward to a nice warm meal and a nice hot bath. Anyway, Timmy says hi. He's thanking you for your feedback and your being here as well. What's also been really interesting about this case is it involves a dog and dog canine psychology and all that kind of thing. So that's also been quite interesting. It is winter in South Africa. It really is cold, which is why he's wearing his Indiana Jones outfit. But his name in winter is Indiana Holmes. Let's get that straight. Okay, guys, take care. Thanks again, mods, and all subscribers. See you guys next time. Ciao.